Hello, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. So glad to gather with all of you today. Please say hello in the chat box. Make sure you're chatting to everyone. We love to know who's in the room. Let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. And the chat is also where you can add questions, and we'll try to bring them in later on in our conversation. A few words about JWA. We are a digital archive that works to transform the way that we understand history and Jewish culture and who makes history by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We also pay special attention to how gender functions in the past and present. And we do all of this work because we believe that uncovering a more diverse and nuanced story will help us make the world a better place. So thank you for being our partners in this effort. The book talks are just one piece of our work, so I hope that you will all take an opportunity this summer maybe to check out jwa.org and explore all of the different things that we have to offer. If you are looking for captioning, you need to turn them on for yourself, and they have moved them to the More section. So where you see three dots and More, you should then, if you click on that, see a button that says CC and Show Captions, and that should turn them on for you. Okay, I am so delighted to welcome this evening's author. Allegra Goodman is the author of 9 books, the newest one of which, This Is Not About Us, which is a Late Show with Stephen Colbert Book Club selection we will be discussing tonight. Her novels include Isola, which was a Reese's Book Club selection, Sam, which was a Read with Jenna Book Club selection, The Chalk Artist, which won the Massachusetts Book Award, Intuition, The Cookbook Collector, Paradise Park, and Catterskill Falls, which was a National Book Award finalist. Her fiction has appeared in The New Yorker and many other places and been anthologized in many places. She's also written 2 collections of stories, The Family Markowitz and Total Immersion, as well as a novel for younger readers, The Other Side of the Island. Her essays and reviews have appeared in many wonderful places. I'm not going to list all of them, but the places you would imagine. And she holds a PhD in English literature and is the recipient of a Whiting Writers Award, the Salon Award for Fiction, and fellowships from MacDowell and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Allegra was raised in Honolulu, but now lives with her family in Cambridge, Mass., where she is joining us from today. Welcome, Allegra. So happy to have you here with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So this was such a fun book. We would love to have you start by share, maybe set the scene for us, and then share a little excerpt with us.
Okay, sure. This is my book. It has a great cover. It looks like a retro kosher cookbook from the 1950s, and it has like this great texture on it. And I'm just going to read to you a little bit from the beginning of the book. This is a scene where Jean, who is very, very sick, and she's in her 70s. She's sick, and her sisters have come to her bedside. In fact, the whole family has come to her bedside. And her sister Helen thinks it's very important that Jean speak to a rabbi because, it's time for her to make plans. And her sister Helen's a little bossy. But anyway, Jean finally agrees to have this rabbi come. And Helen says, thank you. And I'm just going to read what happens when the rabbi arrives at Jean's bedside. Who is that? Jean asked Helen. Rabbi Lieber, Helen said. It's good to meet you, Mrs. Rubenstein. The rabbi looked about 13. In his suit, he seemed like a bar mitzvah boy. Jean wanted to have a conversation with you, Helen said, and then officiously, should I go? Jean ignored the question and told the rabbi, you should know that I'm an atheist. The rabbi nodded. Yes, I understand. Jean added, I don't have time for organized religion. You're in good company, the rabbi said. Jean frowned to find him so accommodating. Didn't rabbis believe in anything anymore? But you believe in God, she said. I do. Jean looked at Helen. That's a relief. You see, Helen told Jean, and she meant, you see, it's a relief, a comfort to think of the Creator. Belief is very personal, the rabbi said. I agree, said Jean. That's why we should keep it to ourselves. The rabbi smiled. My family would like to bury me, Helen broke in. You know that's not true. They want to bury me next to my late husband, Jean said. I would like to go somewhere else. The rabbi asked, where would you like to go? I'd like to be scattered, Jean said. Cremated? Lieber asked delicately. That's not Jewish, Helen declared. Jean looked at the rabbi, who seemed reluctant to speak. It's not our tradition, he said at last. Good. How would we visit you? Helen demanded. Jean said, why do you assume that I want visitors? Helen's tears startled Jean. Not you, she thought. Melanie's snuffling angered her, but Helen never cried. I would visit, Helen said. Oh, fine, Jean told the rabbi. Go ahead and bury me. I won't mind. Thank you, Helen whispered. After all, Jean reasoned, she would never feel it. She wouldn't even know. Do what you want, she told Helen and Rabbi Lieber. Cover me with Roths. That's the end of the excerpt.
So I think we can get a sense from that of the some of the humor that's there, as well as the kind of it's humorous and it's also very piquant in a certain way, though also very sweet, and that's why we have the uh, beautiful apple cake, which makes my mouth water every time I look at it on the cover. Um, and in fact, the first story that you read that excerpt from actually centers on this apple cake recipe. Why did you start with this? Why did you start with this particular story and that key piece?
I had this idea of writing about a woman on her deathbed who's Jewish, who's very salty and very unsentimental and doesn't believe in God. And, it started with her. And then I had the idea of like how her family would respond to that. And so they all gather. And this idea of gathering at, many of you out there who are watching this or listening to this may have had this experience of coming as a family together when a loved one is sick and, talking about what that's like. And then as I started writing about all the family members coming to see Jean, I started wondering about them. And I thought I would like to explore each of their lives. I would like to write about not just this scene and this person, but about the whole family. And so the whole book grew from this story, like a tree, where I follow each branch. So we get to know more about Jean's sister Helen and her sister Sylvia, about their children, their children's wives, their grandchildren. You know, there are a lot of different permutations, a lot of relationships in this book: cousins, aunts and nieces and nephews, and grandparents and grandchildren. And it is a three generations of a Jewish family.
Right, and it's complicated enough that you need a family tree actually at the beginning of the book, just as a reference point. Um, the book sort of elides categorization. It's not totally. I wasn't sure how to describe it. Is it a novel? Is it a collection of stories? How do you see it?
I would call it a serial novel. You could also call it a novel in stories, but I call it a serial novel because I always envisioned it as a book, as a unified narrative with one arc. But I wrote it in pieces over time. And I wrote this book over about 15 years. So it was a very gradual, organic kind of development. And the reason I call it a serial novel was as I was writing it, I was publishing a lot of the pieces of it in the New Yorker and elsewhere. And I was hearing response from readers as I did that.
Mm.
So that's a little different from sort of going away and writing a novel for 3 years and then coming out with a finished product. I had this sort of audience for pieces of it as I went. So I think it's sort of the closest that I can get as a 21st century novelist to sort of the 19th century serial novel.
And so, did people weigh in with their opinions on different characters and who you should explore next?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, nobody said like that the plot should go in one direction or another. I didn't
Right.
get that kind of advice, but people said, I love Lily. I want to read more about Lily. Or, I wondered what happened to so and so. So very nice, questions and mostly encouragement to keep going.
Um, as you sort of said, like each little chunk, each chapter is written from a different character's perspective, although it's third person. So I guess I don't know, is that called from their perspective? It's a different
Sure. Yeah,
story.
yeah. You can be third person and still from somebody's intimate point of view, writing from the inside.
Right. I had to think for a minute about whether it was third person because you do feel like you're very much in people's heads. Um,
Yes.
and
It's
in
a
part,
close third person.
right. And in part because there's a lot of this book is about sort of what do you say out loud and what are you thinking and what is the boundary between that, which for some of these characters is perhaps too permeable a boundary. Or they think that they're holding back, but it doesn't really feel
Right.
like they're
Some have
holding
more
back.
filters than others. That's true.
Yeah,
And that's true in life as well.
for sure. My family does not have a lot of filters, I would say, on the continuum of filtered versus unfiltered families. Our family is definitely not so filtered. Um, how did you choose? So you've said that some people kind of encouraged you to choose certain figures. Were there particular people who you were very excited to kind of you felt drawn to, or people that you felt sort of more sympathetic to their particular journey?
I was actually sympathetic with all of them equally, if that makes sense. You know, some of them are, I wouldn't say I would be sympathetic and understanding to them in real life if I met them, or necessarily want them in my family or have to deal with them as a mother-in-law or something. But as an author, I was very sympathetic to each of them. And one of the things that I really loved doing in this book was exploring their point of view with that sympathy, and also allowing the reader inside so the reader can understand them. There's a divorce in this book, and at first we get to know Richard, the husband, and his point of view of their marriage and the family, and but then as the book progresses, we get to know his ex-wife, and neither of them is a bad person. There's no heroes or villains in this book. They're just flawed people who love their kids and didn't work out and are doing the best they can. And I liked that feeling of that as you read, it's sort of like opening one door after another, and you see more and more rooms in the
Mhm.
house, essentially.
Yeah, it was nice to see people from different categories. I mean, from different perspectives. Like you would hear one person's story and then you'd read a different chapter and they'd be sort of a side character and someone would
Mhm.
have thoughts about them and you'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting that they come across that way in this
Yeah,
particular
that's a
chapter."
really good point. I One of the things I also enjoy about this genre of this sort of serial novel and exploring these different points of view is that the character who's the main character or the protagonist in one story is a bit part in another. And in real life we all think that we are the heroes of our lives. It's the first person all the time. We are the main character. But it was fun to sort of step back and turn things, each time, so that the reader gets to see that they're all main characters at different points.
Right, absolutely. And you've written a book like this before. One of your first books, The Family Markowitz, was also written in a similar kind of style of a multi-generational
Mhm.
Jewish family story with different chapters written about, or
Mhm.
from the perspective of different characters. And that book came out 30 years ago. Did you have that book in mind? Were you sort of eager to revisit that form? Did they have any relationship to one another?
I was always wanted to write another book in that form, in that genre, and I had always sort of thought I would love to write a latter day Family Markowitz that is
Mm,
set nowadays. The world's changed quite a bit in the past 30 years.
for sure.
It was also really interesting, sort of revisiting a different Jewish American family, three generations, also like the family Markowitz, but as an older person. So that when I wrote the family Markowitz, I was a young woman in my 20s, and I was married and I had two little kids. But writing this book, I was a middle-aged woman in my 50s and a grandmother. So although I wrote about grandparents in the family Markowitz, I was not yet a grandparent. I had more in common with the grandchildren, in terms of my age and experience, really. And now I have sort of inhabited those different roles. And so I think it gave me more depth and more perspective writing this time around.
Do you find it easier or harder to write like a character that is more inhabiting the same stage of life as you?
It's interesting. When I was young, I actually found it easier to write about older people and people more. I had more trouble writing about people my age than I did about writing like an octogenarian like Rose Markowitz.
Hmm.
Now that I'm older, I find I have more facility writing about very young people. I think that distance really helps.
Yeah, I
And
could
now that I'm sort of
imagine
in the
that.
middle generation, I'm sort of the age of like the the middle in the middle generation in this book. So the Sylvia and Jean and Helen are like my parents' generation. I'm like the generation of their kids who are the grown kids who are people like Steve and Dan and Melanie. And then the grandchildren are like my children's age.
Hmm.
So So yeah, it's really helpful to have lived more and experienced more.
Right, you have more frames of reference, but I could imagine that it would be could be harder to write your own your own stage of life and to have the
Yeah.
distance of being able to kind of project yourself into something that feels
Having
like
distance and perspective definitely helps. Yeah.
um tell us about the title. This is not about us. It's also the title of one of the chapters. Um,
Hmm.
and that's the chapter about the bat mitzvah.
Hmm.
But it's a really funny title because I think it feels like it's a good refrain for the folks in the book, although I think they seem to mostly have trouble remembering that it's not about them. Did you know that that was going to be the title for a while, or is this one of the things that like came at the very end?
It came later. I was thinking about what I should call it. I was wondering if maybe it should be the family Rubenstein to like
Hmm.
bookend the family Markowitz, but then I didn't like that idea because it is really a very different book and I'm a different person. And it's many years have passed. And I didn't think it had the right ring to it. And my sister actually suggested that I take the title from the chapter that you mentioned and use that as a title for the whole book. And I enjoyed its playfulness. In the story that you mentioned, which is a story about a bat mitzvah, the father of the bat mitzvah girl, Richard, is dating her tutor. But he and the tutor have decided not to go public with that because they want it to be Lily's day, her bat mitzvah, and they're being very adult, and they say to each other, "It's not about us. We will talk about this later." So it has that meaning in within that scene. But then, as a title for the whole book, it has a different kind of valence, as you mentioned, and I will tell you that when I finished the book, I sent it to my youngest child, who is 24 now and working in London. I sent her an electronic copy, and she called me and said, "I think it's really cute that you labeled this document, 'This is not about us,' to reassure the family."
Right.
And I said, "Oh, no, 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 no. That wasn't a label to reassure the family. That's the title of the book." And then there was this pause, and she said, "It is about us." And
Right.
so I enjoyed that. Um,
Well, it's about all of us, I think, in some
yeah,
ways, right?
exactly. I like the playfulness, and my sister is very sophisticated reader and person in general, and very witty. So I took her suggestion.
Yeah, I think it works really well as a title. Um, what about apple cakes? Is the apple cake, does your family have a famous apple cake recipe?
No, no, no. Interestingly enough, my mom was an incredible baker, but she baked much harder things than apple cake. She would do like an apple strudel or something like that. And apple cake is a simple recipe, and that's the thing that's funny about it. And that's why that's why Sylvia, with her intuitive baking and her kind of throwing it together, a rather forgiving recipe for apple cake, makes Helen crazy because Helen works really hard on her baking. And, she says, "I gave you that recipe 20 years ago." I don't bake apple cake, and one of my sons has
Mhm.
baked it, but I don't have a personal recipe for it or anything like that. It's a simple cake, and it's sort of American. It's not like super super traditional. My mom made rugelach, like that would be like a serious Jewish baker. I don't consider this a serious Jewish baking good. It's delicious and it's fun and it's easy and it's rather assimilated, like the family.
Right. Yes, it does sort of fit them in that way.
Hmm.
Well, let's talk about the Jewishness of the book. It does feel like a very Jewish story. In the review to the New York Times, in the New York Times book review, Jamie Attenberg wrote, this is a quote from it, "There is a certain American Jewishness to the book I'd recommend, in the same way I might Marty Supreme, or Whitefish on a Bagel, or The Sound of Bernie Sanders' Voice, or like Therapy. The book is somehow extremely present tense, but still steeped in a specific American Jewish past." I actually felt like the book was way more Jewish than Therapy or Whitefish on a Bagel. I mean, no shade to any of those things, but I love Whitefish as much as the next person, or more possibly. But I actually think there's like a real specificity here that is
Hmm.
more than just kind of like something that's generically culturally Jewish. How did you think
Hmm.
about the Jewishness of the family and the story?
I think it is a very specific kind of part of the Jewish community, and I've always been really interested in being specific when I write about American Jews. So in Kaleidoscope Falls, it's this very observant group of Jews that, go from the city up to the mountains to summer there. And it's a specific time and place, and they have certain rituals and certain traditions. And I was really interested in that. And I would say that I have almost the same level of detail here about the practices of these Jewish people, even though they are not technically as observant, even though some of them don't go to synagogue and some of them go once a year. It's very interesting to me how they practice their Judaism, what they choose to do and what they choose not to do, how they affiliate and how they might not affiliate. And so you're absolutely right. Like, I took it really seriously. And these Jewish people in this book, even the ones who are quote unquote non-believers, they have a spiritual life. And that is something that has always interested me as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, and the book starts at that section that you read where there's sort of this debate about like how does Judaism fit into this particular life cycle? And then we see so many different stages and rituals. There's Shiva, there's Yom Kippur, there's Passover, there's the Bat Mitzvah,
Mhm.
and then the story ends with a bris. Um,
Mhm.
how did you think about specifically the role of ritual and where you wanted it to kind of fit in?
I mean, I wanted it to be real, and ritual is very interesting to me, especially ritual for a group of people who can choose or not choose to practice rituals. They don't necessarily, these are, Jewish ritual for this family is intentional or not at all. So, I'm interested in what is important to them. And that question comes up among them too, as they discuss. Lily innocently asks her, she's wondering why her grandparents choose Yom Kippur of all the holidays to observe,
Right.
as opposed to some other holiday, which might be more fun, and she's trying to wrap her head around what that all means, and selecting your ritual, what draws you to that? Why are some of these things still resonant to you? Why is the Seder so important to some of these people who have a lot of baggage about Judaism? But why is it so important that they do the Seder a certain way or clean their house in a certain way? What is sort of left to them from their childhood and their education, and what floats free,
Right, right. And then it's different for, I mean, even for the brothers, Dan and Steve, who have this kind of baggage around Passover, it's important to each of them, but in different ways. I actually felt like one of my favorite lines in the book, I laughed out loud, was in the chapter about Passover when you said, while Dan was non-practicing Orthodox, Steve was egalitarian, which meant Andrea did everything. And
Yeah.
I just felt like that really, really hit something right on the nose.
Yeah, I enjoyed doing that. I mean, this community is my subject, I study them.
Yeah. But your audience, of course, is quite broad. So probably many readers who are reading this book have no familiarity with Jewishness. How do you sort of figure out how to speak both to something that would I would recognize as someone who lives in a world where that very much described, you know, people I know
Hmm.
in my family, versus people who might not know what Passover is at all?
Yeah, I didn't worry about it too much. I figured that people would just sort of catch on as they went, and that's always been my technique as I work on this stuff. I've had wonderful messages from people who aren't Jewish, and what they recognized was the dynamic and the feelings, even though their rituals might be different or their gatherings might involve different holidays, and I've heard from people in different countries and, all kinds of people who are like, oh my God, I haven't spoken to my sister for 20 years.
Right.
That transcends a specific culture, a specific religion, unfortunately. So the human element was always there, but I think fiction really strives on detail and specificity. So people enjoy that too.
Yeah. And I think also because aside from Yom Kippur and Bat Mitzvah, most of the Jewish things that are happening in the book are really happening in a domestic setting. And so then it's part of it kind of gets folded into it's a domestic ritual like anything else.
Totally.
It could
I'm
be
just turning on my light. One
Thanksgiving.
second. Let's turn on the light. It's getting dark in here.
I know this is the time of year where the lighting will shift in the course of a
Absolutely.
program.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but I know that this isn't a simple time for Jewish authors. Did it feel different writing a book that was so specifically Jewish in this current political moment than it has in the past?
It's funny. You have to remember, I wrote the book before the political moment. So it was like I published the book during that moment, but all this stuff was written. Um, this book was written well before the events of October 7th and all that came after that. And, I think that would take another, that's a different story
Right.
than the one I wrote here.
Well, I wondered that because I noticed that Israel is not mentioned that much, and I feel like given that you're talking about generational tensions in this
Mm-hmm.
family, I bet if you were writing it now, it might play more of a role because that would be one of the things that would be coming up.
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. For sure. The grandchildren and the grandparents,
Right.
a lot could be happening with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you feel like in terms of publishing it in this moment, there's been kind of a welcome reception, or has there been any
Think it's been
hesitation
pretty
around?
warmly accepted. I mean, if it hasn't been accepted in some quarters, I wouldn't know, right? Right? Like,
Right. I guess that's true.
um, but, but I think people enjoyed the humor,
Hmm.
the humanness, and sort of writing up. It's a book about Jewish life, not in crisis.
Right.
There are a lot of books about Jews in crisis, and this one, or the crises are their own doing rather than
Right. The
imposed
family is
upon
the
them.
crisis, not the
There's a
Jewish,
place
not the
for
Jew.
both, and they're both important to address. But
Yeah.
in this particular book, it's not. It doesn't deal with those political events.
Yeah. Um, there was a line in the chapter about Wendy, who's one of the daughters, where I actually think it's her wife says this about her, but says family was her addiction.
Mhm.
Tell us more about how you were thinking about that.
Wendy's a character who she's very loving and very sweet, and she cares enormously about family. And we all might have some relative like who really wants to maintain those relationships and tries to keep in touch with everybody and keep posted on everything. And her wife is a little bit more impatient and feels that Wendy is not treated as well as she should be by her parents, or that she's taken advantage of.
Hmm.
So I was interested in that point of view as well. Wendy's sort of the keeper of the flame in some ways, right?
Yeah, and she's one of the ones who shows up everywhere because she is so interested in staying in touch. So she's one of the characters who you
Mm-hmm.
definitely do see from lots of
Mm-hmm.
different angles. And she's probably the least passive aggressive of any of the characters in the book.
Yeah,
She's sort of
yeah.
the warmest and most straightforward,
Hmm.
um, which is appealing. It's nice to have someone like that who can kind of be the
But her
center.
wife is a fighter.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe she's able to be that way because her wife is a little
Yeah.
more fierce.
Yes, yes.
Um, One of the stories, which is kind of in the middle of the book, is called Sheba, and that is the one that's least connected to the Rubenstein family. It took me a little while to
Hmm.
figure out what the connection was, and then I realized that the character is one of Heather's sisters. Um,
Hmm.
did you intend for that story to be a little bit of a mystery or like a little bit more kind of,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
It's a little bit more of a wild card in there, and I enjoyed thought people might have fun figuring out how it fit. And it's a little different. I had originally thought about writing more about Heather's sisters, and I took out some stuff from this book, and then I put some stuff in. And so as the book developed, this was the one about the sister that stayed. Some readers were almost offended that this story was there because they were like, this story doesn't belong. It belongs in a different book. This is, it wasn't as tightly like the connection was more subtle, and that offended them. And some people loved it. And what I started to think was that if you have a lot of Helen in you, you're going to be mad about the story. If
Mm,
you have Sylvia in you, you're going to be curious and wonder, a little baffled, by the story. But if you're Phoebe, this will be your favorite story in the book.
hmm.
So, it depends on what kind of reader you are. But I was
Yeah,
just having fun.
I love that way of looking at it. I think for me, what I really liked about it is it was a reminder that you could everyone has their own story. You could write, this was a certain collection of whatever, 17 stories about a certain group of people, but that even just within their family and the people who they're connected to, there could be a million more because everybody has a story that they're at the center of that, touches gently and for a
Totally.
second on someone else's story. And so for me, I think maybe this is because of my perspective as a historian and thinking about, our work at JWA as being a whole archive and a whole history that's made up of all these individual stories. But it was a really beautiful reminder to me of, there's just every individual story, it adds up in some way to this much larger collective narrative, which in our case is, beyond a family, but in this book is the story of a family.
Well, thank you. I like that perspective.
And I also enjoyed that it had a dog in it.
Yeah.
And that the dog also kind of gets her own perspective at the end. And I thought that that was also a lovely way of kind of extending. And there are other animals that um, play a role in the story. Definitely, you take the love of pets seriously, or at least some of the characters do. Some are less accepting, but that was another way of kind of extending the
Oh,
love, I
thank you.
thought.
I'll add one more thing about the Sheba story, which the viewers might enjoy as well, which is, this book deals with a lot of different kinds of Jewish people. And Jamie, Heather's sister, is a Jewish person who is very interested in religion and very interested in spirituality, but she's always looking outside of Judaism for it.
Hmm.
What really appeals to her is Kuan Yin in the MFA, the statue, and what appeals to her. So what appeals to her is Buddhism, and what appeals to her is going to divinity school, but she doesn't look within her own tradition at Judaism. So, and that's another flavor. That's something else that's in this family. We have Jean, who's like taunting the rabbi and wants to be cremated. We have, Helen, who takes Jewish education classes at her synagogue and is sort of the kind of person you might see in a Mayan class. uh, we have Sylvia and her husband who go once a year on Yom Kippur, and that's sort of the extent of it. And then Heather, who is the youth director at the synagogue and is quite affiliated, and then you have Jamie, Heather's sister, who ends up, looking in a very different place for spirituality.
Hmm. Yeah. Right. And you kind of get a little bit of a sense of where people have come from, but as have gone to different places, like with Steve and Dan also, who kind of have
Yes.
taken
Yeah,
different roads.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's part of the story of liberal Jews is that there's a lot of choice of what,
Exactly.
what you get, how you construct your Jewish life and then negotiations. But because it's family too, then there's also a lot of feelings about it.
A lot of feelings, and have to deal with other people's choices in the family, especially
Right.
if you're at a Seder table or celebrating a holiday together, or your daughter's having her bat mitzvah,
Right.
So,
Exactly. And also just the I was going to say irrationality, but I'm not sure that's really the best word because that sounds negative in some way. But the ways in which the choices we make don't all make sense to anybody else, right? Like I
that's right.
loved the scene where Sylvia and Lily go to, and Francine in the chat also mentioned this scene in the cemetery. Sylvia and Lily go to the cemetery, and Sylvia starts talking to the graves of her parents, like as if they're
Hmm.
there, and Lily is just like, "What? Like here's this person who." Goes to
Yeah.
synagogue once a year and she thinks that her parents can hear her from beyond the grave? Like, what
Yeah.
are we doing here?
She's like literally showing pictures on her phone to her parents under the ground.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and it's totally perplexing to Lily, but it makes perfect sense to Sylvia. Um,
Yeah.
and I think,
Exactly. So people are expressing their spirituality in different ways. I saw one question go by in the chat. Is intermarriage included? And Wendy and Jill are an intermarried couple. Jill is Catholic. So and but Jill attends the Seder, and she has her own take on things.
for sure, yeah. Um, so sisters are at the center of this book, and you dedicate the book to your sister. Um, why sisters? Why did you make that the kind of centerpiece?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe write what you know. I mean, I have one sister, so I've always been interested in that. And I dedicated this book to my sister. She's the one who came up with, said I should use the title from the Bat Mitzvah story as the title of the whole book.
Hmm.
And she pointed out to me that, I've dedicated this book to her, although it includes the sisters who have this terrible feud. She was like, what does that say?
Right.
But she was saying it laughing because she has a great sense of humor. But
Yeah.
I've always just been interested in sisters. And so, um, in this case, and all the different permutations of sisterhood,
Right.
the
And
way
there
sisters can
are very
support.
positive sisters in the book also.
Really,
Deborah and her
like
sister, and Heather and
they
her
love each other.
sisters,
Yes.
and
And
even
Lily and
Sophie and
Sophie,
Lily.
have they bicker, but there's a bond there.
Yeah.
Um, I'm interested in, all the different permutations of sisterhood and how that also evolves as sisters grow up.
Hmm.
There are also brothers in this book, of course, Stan and Steve.
Right. Um, we have a question from Deborah who asks if you could speak to the choice for Helen not to speak to Sylvia directly.
Mm. Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? And people have said to me, well, why this is so silly and why does this take, why didn't they reconcile in the end? And, I would say like, well, why don't we have world peace? People are complicated. And I've also heard from people who are like, yeah, this happened to me. It's too bad. It's a shame. Helen is a very strict kind of person.
Right.
Um, she doesn't compromise easily. What do you do with somebody who doesn't compromise, She's a good person, but she's a hard person. She's difficult.
Yeah, and I think also when, they have so many years of sisterly stuff between them. So there's this one
Mm.
line where Sylvia says, something about like, I want to forgive her, but Helen won't let me, or something like that. And it sounds so ridiculous. Like, what do you mean? Like, or I want to
Hmm.
speak to her, but Helen won't let me, or something like that. And
Hmm.
but you can imagine that if you've been in a relationship with someone who's been sort of stonewalling you for many years in various ways, you could feel like they're not letting you, even if it's actually something that you do have agency over.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I
Um,
wish they'd reconcile too, but that didn't seem real to me,
yeah. Well, I
given
sort
who
of
they
held
were.
out hope. I mean, they haven't reconciled. I mean, not to
Yeah,
spoil
it's
things, but
true. Helen
I
does
feel
make that
like they're
gesture at the end. It's
right. They're
not
still
sneaking.
alive. They've made
Yeah,
some progress. So, like, I
totally.
sort of maybe this is me being Pollyannish, but I sort of felt like it wasn't. I didn't think the door was totally closed. I felt like it's true that they hadn't yet, but I felt like hopeful that there was still a possibility.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm hopeful too.
Um, there's a question about the violin as a character and its
Hmm.
connection to Phoebe. Can you talk a little bit about that story?
Yeah. Well, music in general is very important to this family, and I think some of their spirituality is in their music.
Hmm.
Jean was a violinist and a violin teacher, and she and Sylvia both and their husbands had season tickets to the Boston Symphony. Um, Jean's granddaughter Phoebe is a violinist and quite good, and Jean leaves her violin to Phoebe. It's this legacy, and I was just really interested in the role that music plays, like listening to music. There is a whole story in this book called Tanglewood, where the family goes to Tanglewood, and it's about the children and the grandparents and the different expectations they have, and so the music here is social and it's expressive, it's spiritual. I was really interested in it as sort of a lens, and using Jean's violin as a legacy
Hmm.
for Phoebe, whose attitude towards it is complicated and evolves.
Yeah. But music is so healing, it feels like in this
Yeah,
book in a lot of
yeah.
ways.
And Wendy also plays guitar, and she's a music therapist, in fact, if you want to talk about healing. So
Mm.
there's music in many, many forms in this family. I
Hmm.
played violin as a girl, so I chose violin because I knew the instrument somewhat, and I
Hmm.
felt a little more confident, writing about it as opposed to like writing about an oboe player, which, I wouldn't
Right.
know
You'd
how
have to
that all
learn a lot.
worked. Yeah, or how to make a reed or any of that stuff.
Um, there was a question earlier about how long it took you to write the book.
Hmm. As I said, I spent a long time on it, but I was working on other projects at the same time. So
Mhm.
I wrote it before, during, and after writing Sam and Isla, the historical novel. Um, so this applique story that begins the book and this incident that begins the book, I wrote probably 15 years ago. So, but I was at the time I was writing these other two novels. And so I would write the novels during the week and I don't write on Shabbat. So it would be like Monday through Friday. And then Sundays I was working on this book only on Sunday mornings,
Mm.
which is why it took me a long time. And then, but I think actually weirdly, writing it gradually over time benefited the book and that I had a lot of time to mull it over and really think about it. And it grew gradually. As I said, like a tree. Trees don't grow fast, but they
Hmm.
grow strong and big.
Right, and then maybe there's more room for the characters to develop and change and
Mhm.
learn in some way because you've been sitting with them, they've been
Oh, yeah,
marinating.
definitely. Felt that I knew them.
Yeah. Someone else asked also if you would, Sarah asked if you would consider writing a sequel to the story. Are there any, I guess I would ask, she's asking specifically about the possibility of reconciliation, but I'm also wondering if there are other characters in this orbit that you are still kind of curious to explore.
I think I'm going to let them go live their lives now. I think I've said what I have to say about them. And I definitely see myself writing about more Jewish families, but it'll probably be a different family.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll be distantly related,
Right,
Jewish
exactly.
geography and all that.
Yes.
You never know.
Um, in the chapter on the Days of Awe, you have this epigraph in September, my people remember, from Florence Jean Goodman. And I was wondering if
Mhm.
that is a relative of yours.
Yeah, she's my grandmother. She was my grandmother. And she
Oh.
was a poet, and that is a line from a poem that she wrote.
Uh-huh.
And she was very sophisticated, wonderful person who loved reading poetry and writing poetry, and she loved literature, and she inspired me as a child to become a writer. Um, and I like that line from her poem, which is really about the high holidays, and that's why, and how people sort of at that they remember they're Jewish and they come back to synagogue, in
Right.
the fall in September.
Well, so you did get your family in there in some way.
Yes.
It's a tiny, tiny bit about your family.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm thinking about you writing this and then writing Sam and Isola at the same time, and I'm curious how you both like how do you manage so many different projects at the same time, and then also they're very different in terms of like contemporary fiction, historic something. Isola takes place in like the 16th century. 16th
Hmm.
century, is that right?
Yeah, 16th
Yeah.
century, right.
Um, and and is about someone who's traveling from Europe to Canada to what is becomes Canada.
Hmm.
So such different stories and time periods. What is your approach and what does that feel like?
Well, first of all, I should say that I was only able to do that much work at the same time because I was an empty nester at that point. So I've had a very productive, like, 5 years, I would say.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm hoping I'm going to have that experience. I don't think
Yeah,
I
I
would have
think
both, but
it's gonna be a renaissance when your
yeah.
last kid goes to college. You'll see. At
My
least it
kids
was
have
for
left,
me.
but it's a slow. It's the leaving is not as full as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, there you well, that is very true.
Yeah.
You can still actively parent somebody in their early 20s for sure.
I really underestimated that part.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah.
But that said, I did really literally have more time because I didn't have children who need to be driven and watched and taken care of in quite the same way, although I still was actively parenting my two younger ones who are young adults. But so that with that caveat, I would say that actually the very differences of the three projects helped me, and was refreshing. That I was never really in danger of like confusing the 16th century novel in the first person with this
Right.
young French noblewoman who's sailing to the new world with the 21st language of Sam, and the 21st century characters and situations of This Is Not About Us. So at that, and I would also say that when I was working on them at the same time, they were in different stages. So
Mhm.
that Sam was far along by the time I started writing the historical novel. And so it was more like I was revising one and rewriting one while I was starting another. And then this book was sort of before, during, and after. I was just very gradually working on it on Sundays.
Mhm. Yeah, that seems like an amazing feat of your brain, but I guess if it works for you, it makes sense to you, even though I can't really imagine writing a novel to begin with. So I guess writing three different novels at the same time is just one step removed, one step further into the land of make believe for me. What are you working on now?
I'm actually writing a new novel.
Hmm.
I'm very excited about it, but I don't tell people when I'm working on it. But let's talk again in 3 years. And we might have a lot to talk about in 3 years.
That's great. I'm excited to hear about that. Is that usually how long it takes you to finish something?
Yeah, I average around 3 years for a book, I would
Hmm.
say. And who knows, by the time it comes, yeah, I think in maybe 3 years it'll be published. We'll see. We'll
Right.
see.
Publishing is a slow process.
Yes.
Um, if folks in the chat have any questions, feel free to pop them in. I'm thinking a lot about one of this came up in the chat a little bit earlier, the kind of question again about the title and about this question of selfishness and selflessness and how do you, when do you make something about yourself and when do you make something uh, not about yourself? And I know you said that you sort of had sympathy or warmth for all of your characters, but how did you think about that kind of question and dynamic and how you would position was it very clear to you like what each person's relationship was going to be in terms of those questions?
About sort of how self-centered they were.
Hmm.
I mean, I think it's normal to be self-centered, and if you're writing from somebody's point of view, I think that's perfectly normal. Then the question is how generous you can be,
Right.
given that you are mostly about yourself. And there's a spectrum of that in this book. And some are more insightful about others, some are more observant of other people, aware,
Yes,
and some less.
yeah, that seems to be a key piece also, just kind of how self-aware people are. It
Hmm.
is a little bit easier in some ways, I think, to take, at least for me, I felt like to take some of Helen's um, difficultness because she knew when she was being difficult and she kind of understood that that's who she was.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and Sylvia, it seemed like she really thought that she was not making it about herself, but then she completely was.
Right. Right. Well, there's that line where they say, the two sisters announce, or Helen says, I would never use this occasion to call attention to myself.
Right. Yeah.
Famous last words.
Right. And there's some line at the end where Sylvia is saying, she's like, you say like she was officially not commenting on it, but she said
Yeah.
XYZ anyway. Um,
Yeah.
Sarah has a question about Helen not being a grandmother and whether that the pain of that was part of what made Helen so kind of unyielding and unable to reconcile.
It's possible. I think Sylvia fears that. I think Helen is also just incredibly stubborn. And I think you may be right that her not being a grandmother comes into play, but I don't think Helen would ever admit that.
Hmm.
So, it's what we admit and what we feel. Feelings are complex. Helen has great strengths. She does. And she's very comforting to her daughter Pam, for example, in her strange way. She
Hmm.
sort of is her strictness and her stubbornness is at some moments what Pam needs,
Right.
ironically. And I enjoyed writing about that. It's sometimes the things that we fault other people for can be virtues and strengths.
Absolutely. And there's something also very reliable about Helen in
She's
her.
consistent. She's
She's right.
extremely
She's very
consistent.
consistent. And I thought it was very sweet at the end that Sylvia was, when she has a third grandchild, that she hurts for Helen to know
Yeah.
that she says, like, I got three and she, I have another one and
Yeah.
she still doesn't have any. And that kind
Yeah.
of sympathy was
Yeah.
very, you could see her continued real care and love
Hmm.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah. But hard to, was it hard to live with them in their continued break from one another?
Not for me. It was hard for them, not for
Hmm.
me. It would be hard for me if it was like my situation. It would be
Sure.
really hard.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine when you're writing a book, though, you're like, you're in the story in some
Yeah.
way with
You're in
them.
it and you're out of it at the same time though. So it's a funny situation.
Right. I guess that's true because you're guiding it from above.
I mean, it's like This book is funny, it's sad, it's ridiculous, it's got its moments of grace, it's got absurdity, it's all of those things. And to me, that's what I enjoy. That's what made it real to me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the people felt very real. I definitely feel like I know people just like these characters, or these characters, I recognize them.
Oh.
Um, Sarah asks if you have any offers for adapting your books into movies.
I have done in the past, had offers. Nothing ever became a movie. Like there's a lot that has to happen for a book to become a movie. So it's never happened, but maybe someday, who knows?
That would be fun. This one definitely, I think, I could see that. Um, Nancy asks if you have a kind of postpartum feeling when you finish a book.
I've not suffered from postpartum depression with my books, not too bad. Um, no, no, I feel very happy when I finish.
Have you always known what the next project was, or do you have a gap of trying to figure it out?
Sometimes I've had gaps in the past where I've been trying to figure things out, and I've also had false starts where I thought I knew my next project, and I was like, no, I changed my mind. So, it might take a little while it's a big commitment to spend 3 years on a book. So, excuse me, I'm careful about who I choose to spend my time with in fiction,
Yes, that is
and
wise.
how things develop. And sometimes things just don't work. Not all ideas are created equal.
Hmm.
So.
Have you had book projects that kind of didn't turn into a book?
For sure. When I was younger, I wrote hundreds of pages that will never see the light of day. And I think that's fine. I don't think anything's really wasted, even if it doesn't get published. I feel like I've learned from everything that I've tried, including my mistakes and my failures.
Hmm. Yeah, I have experienced that in research. It's like even the roads that you go down there turn out to be dead ends. They're part of the process.
Totally. See, I am a researcher. I'm very much like you, a historian and a researcher, except that my research is mostly in my imagination,
Mm.
and the history is of imaginary people. The documents I make up. And I also do all the things a historian is not supposed to do, where I talk about people's motivations and their inner thoughts and feelings, which, historians should not speculate on
Right,
unless they
exactly.
have
It's tempting
documentation.
sometimes. But with Gisela, there was a lot. It seemed like you had to do a lot of historical
I did a
research
lot
for
of
that
research
one
on
because
that.
she's
Yeah.
based on a real person.
Yes, she is. Yeah, I did do research for my historical novel. Yes, for sure.
Yeah, that
But
seemed quite
no
impressive.
historian could really tell you like what she was feeling
Right.
on that island, and that's where being a novelist was helpful. That was the contribution I thought I could make.
Yes. No, that one also would be a good movie. That was a very dramatic story.
Thank you.
Um, I think there's some people who might be, this was not in the public chat, but um, people are interested whether you have an apple cake recipe that you had in mind when you were writing the book. I will
I
say
really
that
don't.
the
Yeah.
the bunt apple cake is not what
Mm,
the apple cake in my family. My bubby made an
yeah.
apple cake, but it was like a more of like a sheet pan kind of, or not sheet pan, but a flat pan kind of apple cake.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't bake apple cake, and as I tell people, I do most of my best baking is on the page rather than
Mm,
in the kitchen. When the book was chosen by New Reads to be their selection in the spring, they included an apple cake by Adina Sussman, who's a wonderful cookbook writer. She did the cookbook Shabbat, and I think she has a new cookbook coming out.
yeah, she does. I think it might be
You
out
can
now.
also get them in Joe Nathan's books, and
Hmm.
I do like the honey cake recipe in Mrs. Grossinger's cookbook, which is a book that my mother gave me, and a book that she used. But I'm not really a foodie. So for me, it was about Sylvia's apple cake, and
Hmm.
it was very much about a cake that was baked in character for Sylvia, for this family, rather than my cake.
Right. Well, but I think for New Reads, they did collect apple cake recipes from
They
some
did. They had a
readers.
contest.
I was
Yes.
curious whether there was going to, whether they were going to put them out somewhere.
Yeah. I saw there was a question about ballet in the book
Mm.
because Lily and Sophie are both ballet dancers and they study ballet. And I will say that I am not a dancer myself, but my daughter danced for many years. So I've experienced some of the dance parents and I've experienced some of what a ballet studio looks like. And I've always been very, very interested in that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you thought the ballet moms were relatable.
Yes, and I liked also Deborah's sort of uh confusion of like, how did I end up as a dance mom?
Yeah.
This is not what
And
I thought
yeah.
I was going to be.
Right. I mean, I relate to that, not just even with dance. 'Cause I have four children and they all did different activities. And so I had one who was a dancer, but then you sort of wonder, like, why am I here all day for this robotics competition? Like, how did this happen to me? Or like now I'm an ultimate parent. Like I have to go to ultimate, like the first ultimate game I went to, I was like, do you have an idea when this game is going to be over? And they were like, when it gets dark. And I was just like, what kind of sport is this? What the heck? Why am I here? So, yes, as a parent, we all have gone down those roads of
Oh,
stuff that our
yes.
kids do, some of which can be very esoteric.
I somehow ended up as a hockey mom, and I don't know how that
Yes,
happened. It
that's a
was
lot of work.
really unintentional, although now my son plays professional hockey, so I guess
Oh, okay. All
it
right.
panned out for him, but it was a lot of
So
early
he was
morning
a
hours.
serious hockey player.
He's a serious hockey player. Yeah.
But all that equipment, oh my God.
Yeah, such
You know,
sticky equipment. It's so disgusting. I don't recommend it.
That's a lot to like Carter. I mean, I've known hockey moms, and they're always like their trunk is full of the stuff, and it's heavy and it's
It's gross.
big.
Right now, my son is home for the summer. I can't park in my garage because it's filled with all of his hockey stuff, which he has to spread out. And yeah, anyway. Um, Lots of questions now about ballet in there. Um, One last question I'll ask you from Sharon is, can you talk a little bit about your process? Do you sort of plot things out or do you let the story take you where it will?
I do both. It's sort of a dance between plotting and improvisation. So I try to outline and sort of have a sense of where I'm going and sort of know the general structure, but that will evolve depending on how the work is going. So I do outlines and lots of notes, and then those evolve as I go. I like to plan a lot, but then I like to improvise and forget the plans. It's sort of like being a jazz musician,
Mhm.
and like you train hard and you rehearse hard so that you can be free later on.
That's amazing. Yeah, that must be hard to sort of find the right level of letting go and holding on to the ideas that you had and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, well, thank you so much, Allegra. This was really great to get to talk to you about the book. And thanks all of you for being with us tonight and for your questions and comments. As I always say, there's always more to discover at JWA. I'm going to point you to a few places to start. There, everyone might enjoy learning a little bit more about Jewish literature by American women, which we have an article about that in our encyclopedia, as well as an article that is about 21st century Jewish literature by women in the US. So, two different encyclopedia articles there. There is also I rediscovered as I was preparing for this, I had forgotten about this entirely, but way back in 2005, when we were marking the 350th anniversary of Jewish life in America, I produced some book discussion guides for JWA. I was just a intern at the time there. And one of those book discussion guides actually included Catterskill Falls, Allegra's
Aw.
first novel. So we put the link to that. This is sadly our last book talk of this series. We're going to be taking a break for July and August, but we'll be back in September with another full year of programming. During the summer, you are all welcome to catch up on any book talks you might have missed. The videos are on our site. This is, I was counted actually our 103rd book talk, so there's a lot to keep you busy. We also just wrapped up the spring season of our podcast, Can We Talk? So the summer is a great time to catch up on those episodes too. And June 30th is the end of our fiscal year. So if folks enjoy these programs, please consider making a donation to help us continue to provide book talks and other programs. And if you've already donated, thank you so much for your support. I saw there was a question about how to get those links. I know they can be hard to pull from the chat. When we send out the video tomorrow, if you click through to YouTube, there's a paragraph underneath the video, and I will put the links there so you'll be able to get there. And so, wishing everybody a really peaceful and restorative summer. I look forward to seeing folks again in September. Until then, take care. Let's take care of each other and have a great summer, everybody. And thank you again,
Thank you,
Allegra. This
everybody.
was so
Thank you,
fun.
Judith.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.